right, so let's welcome in our lead NFL insider, Jonathan Jones, to talk about this. And JJ, there was certainly a lot of conversation about these hip drop tackles in the offseason. We see Joe Mixon, we see Jamar Chase clearly frustrated. Now, whether it's the officials aren't recognizing that these are hip drop tackles or that the players are misunderstanding, what needs to happen so that we're no longer in this situation? We're only in week 2, but moving forward, what needs to happen so refs aren't missing these calls or players aren't misinterpreting what the actual hip drop tackle is?
That's a great question, and it was a confusing definition of a hip drop tackle back in the offseason when the NFL ultimately determined that they wanted to prohibit it. But what the NFL said, and what is very important before we roll the footage again of these plays, is the league said there is very likely going to be fewer flags than anyone anticipates, and that how it will be legislated is ultimately fines, that they needed to get a rule on the books so they could sort of legislate out the behavior. And the thought was, okay, it's going to be hard to throw a flag on it, but we'll see some fines. I want to start with Jamar Chase. And if we want to roll that beautiful bean footage of the tackle that he says is a hip drop tackle, I don't think it is. And I was very confused by it because it's not. And I don't know anyone who thought, other than Jamar Chase, that it was. We remember the sort of hip drop tackles, and we can look at the Joe Mixon one that looks a lot more like a hip drop tackle. But even the Mixon tackle, I'm not entirely sure. The defender has to grab the runner with both hands and wrap him up. Then the defender has to unweight himself by swiveling or dropping his hips. And then they have to land on the ball carrier's lower body. So we see here with Edwards where he wraps him up, he drops his weight, he doesn't swivel his hips, it doesn't seem like, and his entire body doesn't his lower body doesn't necessarily land on the lower body of the ball carrier. Just Joe Mixon's ankle, unfortunately, gets caught up there. Now the league is going to look at this. It could be fined, but I'll say this: last week the NFL identified 2 hip drop tackles that went uncalled in games, one against Jordan Addison, who did not play in week 2, another against Jawan Jennings, who was limited in practice before he ultimately played for the Niners. There was only 1 fine given out for the 2 hip drop tackles, and though the league could fine about $19,000 for a first-time offense, they only fined one of the offenders less than $5,000. So there's still a lot to be figured out here when it comes to hip drop tackles. But of the 2 that we just talked about, I don't really see how Jamar Chase is a hip drop tackle, and Joe Mixon, it could be considered a hip drop tackle.
Yeah, and of course, the whole point of this conversation is just to avoid injury altogether. It's still early. It's still only week 2. So like you said, JJ, a lot to figure out there. Now to some other injury news. The Rams, they are certainly going through it. Cooper Kupp, he was in a boot dealing with some sort of ankle injury after that loss to the Cards. They already have Puka Nacua, who's dealing with that PCL sprain. So how does this offense respond to these injuries that they're already seeing so early, JJ?
Well, they're going to have to run the ball. Because, last year, of course, they were very fortunate when they lost Cooper Kupp that they had Puka Nacua, and that Matthew Stafford was able to take a whole lot more shots down the field, and they were able to surprise a lot of people as the season went on. When Puka went out, we all said, oh, now it's the Cooper Kupp show again. But now that it's possible that he is going to miss some time, and we know that he's on the other side of 30, and this has been a recurring issue. The Rams, I think they're going to have to go out and get someone. And you think about guys that could be gotten, perhaps a Robert Woods, who's with the Houston Texans right now. I think he has been on 21 snaps through 2 games so far. But the combination of Tyler Johnson, Demarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, that's not going to be enough. Especially with Puka Nacua's extended absence and the injury history that we've talked about with Cooper Kupp. You could try to run the ball, as I noted at the beginning, but this is not a very good rush offense, especially when there's not really the threat of the downfield pass. And this is a group that I think is averaging the 2nd lowest yards per rush attempt so far in the early season, and they're banged up along the offensive line as well. So it's starting, not yet, but it is starting to have some shades of the season after their Super Bowl victory, where they just had so many injuries at such important spots, and it became a wash. I had very high hopes for this Rams team. The season is not done, though only 10 to 11% of teams in recent NFL history make the playoffs after starting 0-2. But they're going to very likely need some pass-catching help with so many injuries starting to mount.
Yeah, the task doesn't get any easier on Sunday, where they get the 49ers facing off against them. Let's talk about the Carolina Panthers. This is a team, JJ, that you have covered closely for a really long time, and there's always some new stat out there just to prove just how bad they are, as if we can't just tell by watching the game. But they've been outscored by 60 in Dave Canales' first 2 games. Are you getting any inkling? I know it's a long list of things they have to do to turn this team around, but first steps, anything you can tell us about what's going to be happening there in Carolina?
So I do not anticipate any pressing of the red button right now. That they have a first-time and first-year head coach in Dave Canales. There's a lot of preaching and exercising patience. I go back to a training camp press conference from Dan Morgan, where he was absolutely the general manager, first-year general manager, who said, who would not say or really kind of discuss playoff hopes for this team. It was sort of the, cliche, let's get better every day. There are a number of stats that we could pull up about this Carolina Panthers team, but since 2018, no team has won fewer and lost more than the Carolina Panthers. And we see right here, of course, across regimes, right, across coaching staffs, across offensive schemes, the struggles that they've had. The concerning thing here, and again, I do not get the indication that Bryce Young is going to get benched for Andy Dalton this week. And obviously we'll have to see beyond that. But the concern is that while you could legitimately make a number of excuses for Bryce Young, and because of the mess that was the Carolina Panthers offense last season, multiple different offensive schemes, a poor offensive line, not a lot of speed and separation at wide receiver. In the offseason, they improved the offensive line. The running back room's sort of the same. They certainly improved at wide receiver, adding Deontay Johnson. And Bryce, right now, looks as bad as I've seen him so far in his early career. I'm not throwing in the towel on Bryce Young by any stretch of the imagination, but these first 2 games have been difficult on Bryce, and anyone who watches football can clearly tell that, where last year, again, you could say, man, everything around him, what quarterback could possibly succeed in it? This year, not saying that this is a playoff team if Bryce plays average, but Bryce is playing far below average right now, and he's going to have to pick it up.
Yeah, Bryce Young, 2-16 as an NFL starter. I know we talked about the Chiefs already getting that win over the Bengals, but it wasn't without some disappointing news to their run game. Isaiah Pacheco, he's going to be placed on IR with an ankle injury. Of course, missing at least 4 games there, but it is expected that that recovery time could take longer. JJ, what's the latest that you're hearing about Pacheco and his situation?
So it's an ankle. They're going to continue to run tests until we can ultimately determine exactly what sort of ankle injury it is. But I was told that he will miss extended time. Injured reserve is almost certain to happen, but that we could really look a little bit more than 4 games here. You see the week 6 bye there. Of course, he would have to miss 4 games, not just 4 weeks. So he will get the bye to rest up and heal up just a little bit more. And it was a rough-looking injury, of course, but the Chiefs, they like who they have in their stable right now. They have Samaje Perine, who they signed after the Broncos cut him at the end of training camp. They had Carson Steele come in there and sort of, be the guy who could hang on to the football and help pound the rock a little bit. They also have a couple of running backs on their practice squad. Keontae Ingram, he's a 3rd-year back. They also have Amani Bailey, who is an undrafted rookie. And so I wouldn't at all be surprised if we see Andy Reid and Matt Nagy get a little creative with Xavier Worthy perhaps in the backfield, get him going a little bit like we saw in week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens on that touchdown. So they do like who they have. Maybe they will have some workouts this week, but certainly anticipating that Isaiah Pacheco is going to miss more time than just the required minimum of 4 games.
Hearing Andy Reid get creative with someone as fast as Xavier Worthy is just terrifying news for other teams, JJ. Jonathan Jones, our lead NFL insider, we certainly appreciate chatting with you on a Monday. JJ giving us all the latest news around the NFL. And make sure you stay locked into CBS Sports HQ. Our team has got you covered all season long. News, highlights, scores. We got you covered right here on CBS Sports HQ.